And so I've arranged this into roughly three portions of the talk. In the first one, I'd like to talk about some of the similarities between hibernation and calorie restriction. And I'm certainly not the first person to come up with this idea, and a number of people looked at it. There was a good paper in 1997 by Roy Walford and Steve Spindler, where they sort of explicitly put this idea out that calorie restriction in mammals is very similar to the hibernation response. And this was based on some evidence that a particular gene was upregulated in calorie-restricted mice, and there's also some changes that were noticed in the humans in Biosphere 2. So I guess what I want to put out here is a lot of people have looked at this or thought about it, and it's an interesting idea. So there's a little bit of, there's some merit to it, and it's not completely out there. And some of the features of hibernation that are germane to calorie restriction biology, I would sort of define the hibernation as being a coordinated system-wide adaptation to a decrease in food or energy availability. So just like Tom Prola was talking about, he's looking at this wide screen for lots of genes that are involved in calorie restriction, the response to calorie restriction. You can also think of this as occurring in every numerous tissues in brain, muscle. So it's a wide it's a broad scale thing that happens on an organismal level. And I just point out that there's basically two forms perhaps that we can think of: a spontaneous adjustment to random changes in food availability. So that would be the mouse or the echidna. Food becomes low in availability, and so they go into this torpid state. But there's also the bear or the ground squirrel, who through evolutionary selection, it turns out that food is predictably not going to be around in the winter where they live, and so basically they have a programmed response to enter into this hibernation state. So it's not an induced sort of phenomenon. And that's what's really interesting about these organisms, is because they'll show these changes even in the presence of ad libitum food. So in the lab they will go into hibernation even though they're given ad lib food. So the differentiation there is it's more hardwired, I would say. So those are some of the philosophical or teleological similarities, but there's also some evidence that on the metabolic level that hibernation and calorie restriction are similar. One of them would be that there's a reduced metabolism leading to reduction of body temperature, and in the case of the ground squirrel, it's a profound reduction in body temperature. I'll show that in a bit. But that's a sort of common thread on a metabolic level. Additionally, there's a reliance on stored energy reserves, and certainly under hibernation conditions, there's a shift towards lipid metabolism, fatty acid metabolism, and a sparing of glucose. This is just exactly what Tom Prola was showing in the heart study, where calorie restriction prevented the decline in, or the age-related decline in fatty acid use. And then even further on a finer scale, there's a number of molecular similarities. So there's a lot of changes in gene transcription in hibernators, or changes in enzyme levels that are common to animals under calorie restriction. They're just too numerous to mention here, but the point is that there's a lot of similarities at many different levels of organization. So just if you consider calorie restriction as the response of a body to calorie restriction is similar to an animal undergoing hibernation. There's metabolic changes that are similar between the two, and there's sort of molecular similarities in terms of gene transcription and enzyme levels. So just to talk about hibernation a little more, I want to show you some data about comparing hibernation in small-sized and human-sized hibernators. This is the Arctic ground squirrel and the black bear.